Okay, here we are back at the Cloud Foundry Summit in Basel, Switzerland, and I am here with Steffen Zuber, a platform engineer at anynines, and Michael Lieser, platform engineer at anynines. Good to see you guys both.
Hi.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Yeah, you're welcome. So maybe, I'd like to just get started to talk a little bit about what is the work that you do. Tell us a little bit about your roles as platform engineers.
Yeah, platform engineers. Last year we named ourselves DevOps. So it's really we enable users to use Cloud Foundry mostly. So they have the application, they want to push it on the Cloud Foundry to the cloud, and we develop the data service they need to store their data, their state, their information in a database, in a message queue, whatever. And we're focusing or developing the automation for setting up such data services for backups, restore, auto healing, so that you have the features from Cloud Foundry also for your data service.
So is that your role too?
Yes.
Yeah. And so tell us about tell us about kind of this process of thinking about data services. What is the context you're thinking about data services kind of in the realm of Cloud Foundry?
Yeah, so for Cloud Foundry, it's for the application you have the two-factor manifest, and the important rule is that you have a stateless application. So that means your application doesn't store anything on the local disk, for example, and therefore you need some place where to store data. You need data. For example, if you have a web application, you want to store data about your customer, and there comes the data services. So in our case, it's really, you can say it's a stateful application that runs in the background to store the state of a stateless application running on the platform.
How's that different from your experiences compared to earlier in your career? What is it is changing in your work right now?
Yeah, before I worked as a web developer on the other side. I developed the apps and which use the data services. And now, I switched I switched to the anynines team, and now we worked on the backend side, more or less.
Right. So those data services that you're integrating in a Cloud Foundry, can you give us some examples?
Yeah, sure. So we started with PostgreSQL or MongoDB, and then what we are using is a tool called Bosch. It's also used for setup, deploy Cloud Foundry.
Right.
And we use this tool for setting up our data services. Yeah. So right now we have 7, like PostgreSQL, SQL database, or non-SQL database like MongoDB, Redis for caching, or RabbitMQ for message bus, so that really everyone gets what he needs. So you don't know exactly what your customer wants till he tells you. So we have some basic services that covers, I say, 90% of the use cases.
So how do you think about data services internally? What is, when you're thinking about building out your own architecture for anynines, what is it, how does this concept of data services fit into your own DevOps methodologies that you're building internally at anynines? What's your DevOps process? Tell us about your kind of your architectures. How are you building out your architecture? How are you thinking about data services?
So let's start, for example, like this. When we want to integrate a new service or want to offer a new data service, we have some, let's say, 5 questions that we ask. For example, is this service highly available? Because when my application is highly available on the platform, my data service needs to be highly available. At least, so if my data service fails, then my app cannot work even if I have multiple instances. So this is an important question. Or how can I do backups? How can I do a failover, self-management, self-healing? And in our case, then we have a base architecture, then we apply to the new service, we start implementing, and then we are also responsible for setting up these services, for operating them. So it's really this DevOps. So we are developing the service, then operating it, and doing it in an agile process. We're doing a lot of pair programming, Kanban, and
Well, would you add anything to that?
No.
Okay. So so we're hearing a lot about state now, and like in thinking about state, and it's a term has not really been used a lot until recently. How is that changing application architectures?
I think a lot. So as you said, it's not a very common name because let's say some years ago you deployed your application to a server and then you have a persistent disk and you don't have to care that you cannot write, that you can write on your disk, so you had your state within your application. It's now on Cloud Foundry we have these features for self-healing, fast bootstrapping, fast scaling, and now you have to rethink your deployment or developing strategy because you lose this possibility to store state where your application runs. So it's sometimes hard to move old or legacy applications to Cloud Foundry,
Right.
because they are developed in another way with another use case in mind. So it's really changing. Well, you have to change the thinking on developing applications when you want to run on a platform.
How has it changed your thinking? How is your thinking been affected by new application architectures? How do you approach the work that you do now? Is it different?
Yes, I would say it's different because, as Steffen already said, we have no state in the app.
Right.
And we need another place where we can put it.
Right.
That are the data services today. Or
Right.
In the future.
Right. So when you're thinking about the fundamentals of that data service, so you don't lose all your data, right? What are those kind of considerations you're thinking about?
As you said, you don't want to lose your data, so you need a backup and restore strategy. You want that your data is secure, so that
So what's the backup strategy, for example, that you're seeing?
Depends on the service.
Right. So what are some of the particular use cases you're seeing come out of that?
Let's take PostgreSQL. So
Right.
Most services come with some backup strategy in mind. So basically, we are using them, streaming then the data to another place, for example, bucket on Amazon S3 or whatever, so that you have the data on another place, and if something happens, you can just restore the data and lose only, 1 hour of your data and not all. So that's important. Another important topic is also security. So you need to make sure that the connection between the application and data service is encrypted via SSL, or also that no other customer or whatever user can access your data, because that's one of the most important things, to make sure that the data is only accessible by yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how are you seeing users starting to integrate data services into their applications? What are some of the common use cases that you're starting to see?
I guess it's hard to say that there's a new way it's more like it's a new way how they integrate services. So they needed somehow a service
I'm
before.
curious about the approaches they're taking.
You have to be sure that your that your data service is not running on the same machine like your application. So you need to think about, how can I connect my application to my data service via a URL, for example. So you have to change a little bit the configuration of your database, for example, in your application, that you don't listen on localhost, but then on the URL that's provided by the platform. So, and also for the credentials to connect to the database.
Right.
That's another way of receiving them, let's say it like this.
Right. So instead of going from the client now, it's the source is the URL in many ways.
You're still using the same client in your application, but the configuration for the client comes in another way than you used before. So you cannot hard code it, everything in your application, in your client. You need to be able to read it on the fly. So when you start your application, the usual way is, for example, on Cloud Foundry, to read the environment variables, and everything is written there. So your application on startup reads the configuration and then can connect the client to the data service.
How's that comparatively, to your own experiences?
Before you have hard-coded the configuration in your app, and now you have to dynamically get them, in this case of Cloud Foundry, from the environment. And yeah, so if you bind a new service to your app, for example, then you need the possibility to get this configuration from that. So yeah, you have to change. You have in mind that you not longer be able to set this configuration a standard config file which you ship with your application. So yeah, this is the way it changed a bit. Cloud Foundry. Cloud Foundry offers the data services to the app.
Tell us about the configuration then, like that change in configuration.
Yeah, it's I don't know how to say. It's more like in as we said in Cloud Foundry, as you have the separation really between this stateless application and the stateful data service.
Yeah.
You need this somehow, as Michael said, dynamic configuration.
Yeah.
At the end, it's the same values. You have a username, a password, a host, URL, but you they are pushed in another way into your application.
It's the endpoint.
Yeah.
Connections, right?
Right. So yeah, everything you need, even if you have your old style application running on a server and the database is on the same server, you still have a username, a credential, the host and the URL and the database name.
Right.
But then you know it before and can hard-code it in a config file, put it on the server and start your application. Right now you have to be sure that you really read the configuration out of the environment dynamically when you start your application, or when you, for example, add a new service. They have the same variables like username and password, and you can just read them out of the environment variables. So you don't have to change much in your application. You can switch between data service. They are like, for example, you can switch from PostgreSQL to MySQL. If this is possible in your application, it's not so easy, but yeah, it doesn't change the way how you get the configuration of the data service.
Mm-hmm. It opens up lots of issues with dependencies, doesn't it too? I mean, if you're using a data service, right, and you need to think about how that, and like, what are those connection points, and how is the API running, right? You have to start thinking about that a lot more. Don't you?
Yeah, you should know how you use the data service. So this is nothing the platform takes away from you. It's easier for you because you don't have to set up the data service, but you should know how to work with PostgreSQL or with MongoDB. So there are differences, and yeah, a little bit basic understanding of the service is still important. Yeah.
So tell us more about anynines. Tell us about the company and what is it that you're focusing on? Data services, obviously, right? We're talking about it, but tell us more about anynines and kind of its focus these days.
Yeah, so at anynines we started almost at 2011 with Cloud Foundry, so with version 1, and we set up our own public Cloud Foundry installation in Germany. And usually you don't have a data service with the open source Cloud Foundry, so we came up with our own solution for offering data service, and we want the same user feeling like you have when you push your application. You CF push, CF scale, and it's really easy, and we want the same for the data service. So you have just one command to set up a data service, and somewhere in the background, for example, Postgres service comes up and you can use it easily. And yeah, we wrote an automation framework for that using Bosch. Right now we have 7 to 8 different data servers we also offer for customers. And yeah, so we're doing a lot of consultant part in the Cloud Foundry environment, doing operations on-premise for customers, and also then selling our data services for them, so that they can use. They really have to only focus on the application, because we take care about the platform and the data service.
So tell us about, maybe you could talk about that architecture that you've built for those data services.
Yeah, sure. So it's all already now a standard. The Open Service Broker API is, I think, since last year it's a standard. It's still only also used in Kubernetes. So, but the Broker API was there before. So we implemented this interface that comes or was defined by Cloud Foundry. And you have these core component, the service broker, that manages the service instance. So-called the service instance is then an individual data service, virtual machine or container, whatever you want. In our case, it's a virtual machine where then, for example, PostgreSQL server is installed. And yeah, the service broker takes care about the creation of such a data service for you, for how the credentials are created on the database, then shipped to your application so that you have really the connection. And yeah, as I said, we are using Bosch for setting up the data service. So Bosch, it's managing or orchestrating virtual machines and manage the life cycle. So we have the features from Bosch like self-healing and all that also for our data services.
So then, I mean, maybe you can help us answer this. Is like, you know, now we're seeing more container infrastructures emerge, right? Are you starting to use container technologies for your, you know, for building out the anynines platform, or how you're or data services? Container technologies are, you know, are you using container technologies at all with your application architectures?
Yes, we plan to use them. Yeah, we plan to use Kubernetes in the future. Yeah, but we are in the beginning currently.
Yeah, where are you on that process then? Where are you on that?
Yes, so there's, as you said, a lot of demand for containers, Kubernetes, because you have just this fast setup. You can easily set up a container. Yeah, right now we are still in the experiment phase, let's say it like this, because we have to change something in our architecture.
What do you have to change in your architecture?
Not the architecture at whole, but we are using, as I said, Bosch. It's working with virtual machines, so we have to take away or replace this part if you want to set up the data service in a container. So, and what we want the same user experience on the Docker or Kubernetes side than we have for the virtual machines, and there is still something to do on our side. We have to make sure that's really working as we want.
Right, because that gets into thinking. So that starts getting into like how you use the cloud provider interface, isn't it?
Yeah, right. So yeah, we could, for example, use the Bosch and change the cloud provider interface. It's this small component that's infrastructure dependent, so that you really have for each infrastructure one CPI, and we could change the CPI to use it as a container, or perhaps come up with another management solution for the containers. So and this is right now what we
that's right now what you're doing, because you're moving from like a virtualized infrastructure more to like a container architecture then.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Right. And are users asking about that? I mean, what are the questions you're getting from users about it?
Yeah, it's more like, did we support Kubernetes already? And then it's more like, not so far, why do you need it? And mostly it's like, it's easy because you have the same container on your local machine, you configured it as you want, and then they want to put it on the platform. And it's more like that you have this easy to go way for a developer, because you can configure everything in this container as you want and then just push it to a platform. It's more like this fast feedback and fast development cycle. Yeah.
Now, going forward, you know, in terms of data services, what are some of the you know, the factors that you're considering in the market now as you kind of build out your own data services platform? What does that roadmap look like, so to speak? What is that? How are you thinking forward? What is it that you're looking at going into the future?
Of course, right now we are, as most of our customers are, we have customers using the data service, so we have to keep them already updated. There are new versions of PostgreSQL, new versions of the other services. So this is always on our roadmap to update everything we have. Then the next big thing is really the Kubernetes part. So there will be a lot of our sync power in it, and a special data service we don't have right now on the roadmap. It really depends what the people ask for, but yeah, the main focus is really bringing our data service framework on Kubernetes so that we can use it everywhere.
Would you agree? Yeah. Well, I think that really is you know, a opportunity for us to take some time, you know, to think about, you know, Cloud Foundry, doesn't it? I mean, in like how it kind of adapts kind of to this new feature.
Absolutely, yeah. So I guess it's all you notice here on the summit. It's really a lot of questions about Kubernetes, Cloud Foundry. Can they work together? Will someone kills the other?
But it's really not about Cloud Foundry versus Kubernetes, is it? Isn't it more about Bosch versus Kubernetes? That's what Dr. Nick was saying from Stark and Wayne. He was thinking it's really not about Kubernetes versus Cloud Foundry, because Cloud Foundry is like the CF push, right? It's like that.
Yeah, but I guess for us it's okay because we know Cloud Foundry, know a little bit of Kubernetes and get the advantages. But for people that are not so familiar with Cloud Foundry and they don't know the advantage or the difference between Kubernetes and Cloud Foundry, for them it's more like, yeah, here I can push my container, I have my container on my local machine. It doesn't work like this on Cloud Foundry. At the end, yeah, it will be, is Bosch still the way to deploy data, especially for the data service? Is it still okay to use a virtual machine, or should we move everything to containers? And then, yeah, it can be discussions about Bosch. Is it still useful, or should we move to Kubernetes and the tools that come within Kubernetes?
Is that a question you guys are thinking about then?
Sure.
Yeah.
This is why we are right now still evaluating and not saying, okay, we push everything on Kubernetes.
Because in some senses Bosch and Kubernetes are redundant. They're doing the same thing in some ways. They're both, you can.
Yeah, you can say in
Bosch
some way.
But Bosch is built for a virtual machine environment.
Yeah, but at the end, if I want to use a data service and I have the same features in a container and a virtual machine, for me it doesn't matter what is running in the background. For us as a data service provider, of course, it matters, but the customers of us, they don't care. They want a PostgreSQL service. It should be secure, there should be backups, there should be a failover, and they
expect it.
They want the feature and not the everything behind.
So my last question, how do you then engineer for those expectations that users have? What are some of the things that you're looking at? I mean, it must be through your own DevOps processes internally to think about how you can find more efficiencies internally to build out, more features and more capabilities. And integrate more deeply into Kubernetes, for instance, if that is it.
Yeah, I guess in our normal daily work, it's I guess it's because Cloud Foundry and Bosch are still or are already really complex topics, and then, you have Kubernetes again, so the knowledge transfer is really important. So if we cannot all start looking at Kubernetes because we have to do our daily work, so there are 1, 2, 3 guys working on Kubernetes, and then we have to transfer the knowledge in our team in a very efficient way, so that everyone then can start working on both sides. And I guess this is the tricky part in our work.
Well, thank you both for taking the time to talk. I really appreciate it. I've been with Steffen Zuber, platform engineer at anynines, and Michael Lieser, a platform engineer at anynines. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you too.